The door was already off the second hinge when Nora grabbed her phone. She had not planned to call anyone. She had planned to keep quiet, the way she had learned to keep quiet over 3 years with Darius, the way she pressed her lips together and breathed through it, and waited for the pressure to drop the way weather dropped after lightning. But the bathroom lock was a push-button privacy latch, the kind an 8-year-old could pop with a coin, and Darius was not using a coin. He was using his shoulder. "You made me look like an idiot in front of my mother." Each word arrived through the hollow core door on a separate impact. 3 years I have looked after you. 3 years I have paid your share of this lease. And you embarrassed me over a lease clause. Nora pressed her back against the cold tile of the pedestal sink. Her name was Nora Vasquez. She worked the night shift transcribing psychiatric intake assessments at Meridian General, $12.50 an hour, 4 nights a week, and she had been doing it for 2 years while Darius told anyone who asked that she worked for him. They lived on the 8th floor of the Alderton building on West Fern, a pre-war block in a neighborhood that smelled of diesel and Dominican cooking, and the superintendent's name was Carl, and Carl had already told her 3 weeks ago that what happened inside the units was not his business. The door buckled. She had not embarrassed him over a lease clause. She had read the lease addendum that had been sitting in his desk drawer for 4 months, the one he had not mentioned, the one that converted her name on the lease to occupant without tenancy rights, and she had quoted Section 4, Paragraph 2, Subsection C from memory at the dinner table in front of his mother and his 2 friends from the gym. And Darius had gone very still in the way that meant the evening was over. The evening was not over. The door buckled again and the push button popped. He stepped in with his shoulder already forward, and the first strike caught her across the left cheekbone because she turned her head at the wrong moment, and the bathroom wall met the back of her skull half a second later, and she was on the tile with the phone still in her hand before she understood she had fallen. She locked the bathroom again from the inside, which was pointless, and pushed herself upright against the cabinet under the sink. Her vision doubled and then settled. She could hear him in the hallway, pacing, which meant he was deciding whether the evening continued or ended, and she had learned over 3 years that pacing meant it continued. She looked at the phone. There was no one to call. Her sister lived in Albuquerque and had a newborn and a husband who worked nights, and Nora had stopped calling her 8 months ago because she did not want her sister to hear the careful way she spoke. Her 2 friends from the intake unit had drifted after she had cancelled plans 3 times in a row, because explaining why she cancelled required explaining Darius, and she was not ready to explain Darius. The police in this precinct took a combined 18 minutes on weekend calls to this building, which she knew because she had timed them twice. Darius was friendly with the officer who covered the first 2 floors of the Alderton building and with Carl, who had a brother on the force. She had no one. Her phone suggested otherwise. She opened her contacts because her hands needed something to do, not because she thought there was anyone there. She scrolled past her sister, past a dentist, past a pizza delivery number she had not updated in 3 years. She stopped at a name she did not remember adding. E. Vayne, no title, no company, a local number. She remembered him at the same moment the door at the end of the hallway opened, and she heard Darius's footsteps turn back toward her. 6 weeks ago she had been finishing a double shift at Meridian General, waiting for the elevator at the psychiatric intake desk, when a man in a charcoal coat had come through the main entrance with a member of the night staff. He did not look like a family member. He looked like something imported from a different century and dropped into the fluorescent lights of the intake corridor, and he had turned and seen her standing by the elevator holding her left wrist with her right hand the way she had been holding it for 4 days, and he had said nothing except to hold out a card without looking away, and she had taken it without knowing why. And by the time she looked up he was already through the staff door. She had put the number in her phone that night. She had not known why then either. Darius's footsteps stopped outside the bathroom. She typed, "This is probably the wrong number." He is outside my door. I do not know what to do." She pressed send before she finished deciding to. The reply came in 9 seconds. "What floor? What building?" She told him. "I will be there in 9 minutes. Unlock the window." She looked at the window. 8th floor. He sent a second message. "I am coming. Keep breathing." 14 miles northwest, in a house that did not appear on any map of the city, Elias Vayne was reading a contract dispute between 2 clans in the Calderash territory that had been ongoing for 63 years. He read at a long table of pale walnuts, one hand flat on the document, one holding a glass of something amber and very old. He had not moved in 40 minutes. His aide, a man named Bertram, who had been with him for 11 years and who had stopped being surprised by most things in year 3, stood near the fireplace with a tablet and the patience of someone paid to have it. The phone was face up on the table. Bertram watched his employer's eyes drop to it. He watched what happened next. The contract went down first. Then the glass. Then Elias Vayne stood up from the table, and the 2 estate staff near the door pressed themselves against the wall without being asked, because something happened to the air in that room when he moved that way. He was not a large man by architectural standards. He was exactly the kind of man who could stand in a room full of people and be the only one in it, and right now he was crossing to the coat rack near the entrance, with a quality of intention that Bertram associated exclusively with very old debts being called in. Call Morrow. Elias did not stop walking. Tell him to have a surgical kit and 2 units of O-negative at the estate by the time I return. The dispute with the Calderash will wait 63 more minutes. He was through the door before Bertram finished the sentence. Bertram called Morrow. Inside the bathroom, Nora counted. 2 minutes. She had turned off the light because somehow that helped, because Darius's shadow under the door was less alarming than his voice through it, and his voice had stopped, and the silence was worse in a different way. She pressed her back against the cold pedestal and kept her breathing shallow. He tried the handle. 5 minutes. He had stopped trying the handle. This was worse than the trying. She thought about the man at the intake desk and the card in her phone, and the fact that she had sent a message to a number she had entered into her phone at 2 a.m. in a hospital elevator, which was an act she could not fully explain even to herself. And she thought about the 8th floor window, and whether 9 minutes meant 9 minutes from when he had sent the message, or 9 minutes from when she had replied. She heard Darius walk to the kitchen. She heard the drawer. 7 minutes. The footsteps were back, slower now. Nora, his voice through the door, was patient in the way that scared her most. "We can talk about this. I am not angry. I just want to talk." 8 minutes and 40 seconds. She heard a sound she could not categorize. It was not footsteps. It was not Darius. It was something that happened to the structure of the building, a pressure change, the way an equalization in air feels in an elevator, except it originated from the direction of the front door rather than the shaft. Then, the front door was simply open. She knew it was open because Darius stopped talking. 9 minutes. She did not hear what was said in the front hallway. She heard the register of it, the deep level at which Elias Vayne spoke when he was not trying to sound like anything at all, which was worse than shouting, and she heard Darius's voice go from patient to surprised to something that was not quite either of those things, and then there was a single impact that she felt through the tile under her feet. Then silence. Then a knock on the bathroom door, which was so unreasonably ordinary that she did not respond to it. Nora. His voice was completely different now. "The door is not going to come at you. I give you my word." She unlocked it. He had not turned on the hallway light. He stood in the dim with his coat still on, and there was nothing on his hands or his coat. which told her the impact she had felt had been Darius meeting the wall rather than the reverse. He looked at her face and then at the floor, and she watched his jaw tighten once and release. In the doorway to the living room, Darius was sitting with his back against the baseboard. He was conscious. His right hand was pressed to his left cheekbone in a way that confirmed the impact had been precise and deliberate and targeted. And it occurred to Nora in a distant, factual way that the cheekbone Elias Vayne had chosen was the same one the wall had chosen for her. Darius's mother was standing in the living room doorway with her coat still on. She had apparently arrived for a continuation of the dinner party that had never finished. Beside her were two men Nora recognized as Darius's friends from the gym, and behind them in the hall was Carl, the superintendent, who had heard the noise from his unit on the ground floor. 4 witnesses. Elias did not look at them. He looked at Darius's mother. The Alderton building has an outstanding refinancing application with Vayne Capital that your son has signed as a co-applicant. That application will be withdrawn at the market open on Monday. The building will not find a comparable lender within 60 days. Your son's name will appear on every supplementary inquiry the underwriting team generates for the next 14 years. He paused 1 beat. That is the financial matter. The personal matter is between him and the consequences he has earned. I suggest you take him to a hospital. Darius's mother did not say anything. Elias turned back to Nora. He went down on one knee in the hallway, on the floor she had cleaned herself twice a week for 3 years, because Darius said a dirty entryway reflected on the person who opened the door. And he looked up at her, and his voice dropped to something she had not heard from a person in a long time, which was the quality of someone who was not going to leave before she told him to. Can you walk? She could walk. He stood, and she walked, and he kept his hand at a distance of approximately 3 inches from her back for the entire length of the hallway, close enough to catch and far enough to give her the shape of the space, and they went down 8 flights of stairs because she asked him not to use the elevator, and he did not ask why. She did not lose consciousness in the car, which she noted as a professional achievement. The vehicle was a black Bentley Mulsanne, and the interior smelled of leather and something older that she could not name, and Elias Vayne drove with one hand on the wheel and 2 fingers of the other hand pressed lightly against the pulse point on her left wrist. You are not going into shock. He did not look away from the road. Your pressure is holding. You are reading my pulse by driving. I have been doing this for a long time. She thought about asking him how long. She did not ask. The number, she said instead. I did not mean to have it. I did not mean to use it. I know. I may have cost you something. Whatever you said about the application was true and will happen regardless. He glanced at her once and back at the road. The building's finances are genuinely precarious. I did not invent that. That is not the same as saying it was not a threat. No, it is not. She pressed the back of her head against the headrest carefully, avoiding the knot. Outside, the city moved past at the kind of speed that meant the traffic signals were not giving him any trouble. She did not ask about that either. My mother used to work for someone like you, she said. Not like you. But old families. Documentation, contracts. She watched a light blur past. She said the paperwork in those circles was unlike anything in ordinary law. She taught me to read it. Something changed in the way his hand sat on the wheel. She noticed it and filed it and did not mention it. What happened to her? The question was quiet, aimed at the windscreen rather than at her. She died owing someone something. She never told me what. He was quiet for 3 seconds in a way that was not the quiet of someone who had nothing to say. Then they arrived at an iron gate set into a stone wall, and the gate opened before he touched anything, and she stopped asking questions. Morrow turned out to be a small, efficient man in his 50s who treated her collarbone and her cheekbone and the contusion at the back of her skull with the brisk competence of someone who had done field medicine in circumstances he had chosen not to remember. He taped her ribs, which had one hairline fracture she would not have found on her own. He gave her something for the pain that tasted like black tea and worked faster than anything she had been prescribed. Elias sat across the room while Morrow worked and did not look at her injuries directly, which she understood was a choice. When Morrow left, she tried to apologize. "Don't." Elias did not turn from the window. I called a stranger at 11 at night and told him a man was outside my door and he drove across the city. Don't apologize for that. I am a complication you did not plan for. He looked at her then. Not at her injuries. At her. My mother died owing someone something, she said, because the painkiller had smoothed some of her usual editing, and I have spent most of my life trying to prove I do not cost more than I produce. I am very aware that tonight I have failed at that considerably. He was going to say something. She could see him forming it. But the double doors at the far end of the room opened, and whatever he had been about to say went back to wherever it had come from. The man who entered did not knock. He was tall and pale, in a way that registered differently from the way Elias Vayne was pale, which was the difference between marble and chalk. He wore a grey suit and carried a leather portfolio the colour of old blood, and behind him were two men who stood in the doorway without entering, which meant they were there as witnesses rather than backup. He set the portfolio on the long table near the window and opened it. "My name is Aldrich." He extracted a document without ceremony. "I represent the Crimson Ledger Consortium. Director Vayne sends his regards and his sincere hope that the woman recovers quickly. This is a debt instrument executed in 1691 between the consortium and an archivist family named Vasquez, ratified over 5 generations, and most recently renewed in 1983 by one Elena Vasquez, who I understand was this woman's mother." Nora did not move. The instrument names the archivist lineage as collateral on a debt of 600 million in supernatural legal tender to be called upon in the event of the lineage's resurgence. Aldrich did not look at her while he spoke. He was looking at Elias. "We have been monitoring her for some time. Your arrival at her location tonight triggered a surveillance flag we placed on the building 4 years ago, when we identified her employment and began to assess whether the lineage had resurfaced in her." He straightened the document on the table. "We are not here to harm her. We are here to collect what the consortium is owed. She will be housed, compensated, and returned when her services are no longer required. The estimate is 2 to 3 years. Elias said nothing. Aldrich continued without pause. "You have taken something that belongs to us by contract. The consortium has spent 3 decades building the legal infrastructure for this claim. Every allied clan in this city has been offered a 30% equity share in the Eastern Territory transfers if they decline to assist you. You will find, when you make your calls tonight, that you are without allies." He closed the portfolio with a soft, definitive sound. "We would prefer this to be resolved commercially." Elias stood up. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The next person from your organization who enters this house uninvited will leave it in a way that requires more than 2 witnesses. He looked at the 2 men in the doorway. "You are welcome to demonstrate that I mean that. I would enjoy it." Aldrich picked up the portfolio. Director Vayne expected this response. He wanted me to convey that he respects it. Aldrich moved toward the door but did not hurry. He also asked me to make clear that the instrument has no counter clause. It cannot be voided by a claim of rescue or protection. The law that governs it predates your authority in this city by 400 years. You have 72 hours to reconsider. He was gone. The doors closed. Nora sat very still on the treatment table with Morrow's tape around her ribs and looked at the space where the document had been. The Eastern Territory transfers. She kept her voice level, the ones the instrument secures. What happens to them if the debt goes uncollected? They revert to contested status. Elias turned from the window. 6 centuries of consortium acquisition, undone, and the instrument. Where is the original filed? He looked at her. Their vault. A pause. Why? Because my mother kept copies of everything she signed. Nora set the mug down. She called it occupational caution. And I know where she kept them. She did not sleep that night, not properly. Though she lay in a room that was the size of her entire apartment and contained a bed that did not creak and sheets that were not from any catalogue she had ever opened. Through the window the city was a band of light below a band of dark, and she listened to it and thought about her mother, who had been a careful woman with meticulous records and a debt she never explained, and who had died owing someone something, and who had perhaps known this was coming, and had perhaps tried to protect her daughter from it, and had perhaps done exactly that, in the only way available, which was to teach her to read. She thought about the intake corridor and the charcoal coat and the card extended without condition. She thought about the surveillance flag on the Alderton building, 4 years old, placed the same year she had started at Meridian General. She thought about a man who could have known and had still come anyway, which was either the most dangerous thing about him or the most important. She decided in the small hours that it was both. In the morning, Elias brought her tea. He set it on the table by the window without ceremony, and then sat down across from her and was quiet, which she had already identified as something he did instead of filling space with words that cost nothing. Outside, a car moved on the street below. Somewhere in the house, someone was running water. My mother taught me old family documentation, legal contracts in the original forms. She used to make me read them aloud and correct my pronunciation of the clauses. I thought it was eccentric. She wrapped her hands around the mug. I can read what the consortium brought last night. I know. You knew before last night. When you mentioned her. I confirmed it when I watched you looking at the portfolio. And you were going to tell me. When you were ready to hear it. She thought about this. She thought about a man who noticed a bruised wrist in a hospital intake corridor and offered a card without explanation, and about a surveillance flag on a building 4 years old, and about the fact that he had not asked her for anything. I have always cost more than I am worth, she said. Every person in my life has eventually confirmed it. My father left before I was 2. My mother died before I could help her. Darius spent 3 years making very sure I understood the accounting. She looked at him. And now I find out I have been an item on a ledger since I was born. It is a very consistent theme. He did not answer immediately. Was that what you wanted to tell me? She asked. When Aldrich interrupted. No, that was not what I wanted to tell you. But the house had begun to move in small ways that meant something had changed outside, and he stood up, and whatever it was again, went back to wherever it had come from. The envoy returned that evening, not Aldrich this time, but 2 junior representatives, with a revised offer that Elias declined in 4 words and had them removed in under 3 minutes. Nora watched from the upper landing and said nothing. She tried to leave at 9 o'clock. She had worked out the logistics carefully. She could take a car, she could stay with a colleague from the intake unit, she could leave before the consortium concluded that the simplest solution was to take her from somewhere less defended. She put on her coat, which Elias's staff had cleaned and pressed while she slept, and she walked down the main staircase and found him in the entrance hall. He was reading, standing up, in the way she was already beginning to recognize as his default state. I am the cause, she said. The debt is mine. My mother made it, and I inherited it, and that is not your problem to carry. He did not look up from the page. Go on. The consortium will not stop. You said yourself your allies have been bought. If I am not here, you have nothing to defend. He turned a page. "I am costing more than I am worth," she said. "I have always cost more than I am worth." Every person who ever left confirmed it, which is a list long enough that I have stopped arguing with the evidence. He closed the book. That is the belief, not the evidence. From where I am standing, the evidence is that you read a lease addendum from memory at a dinner table because the clause mattered and you were the only person in the room who understood what it meant. The evidence is that you called a stranger at 11 at night and gave him a building address and a floor and trusted that he would come, which is not the act of a woman who believes she is worth nothing. The evidence is that you sat in a car with a man you did not know and told him about your mother without being asked, which is what people do when they are trying to understand something, not when they are trying to disappear. She was still. "You have been accounting for yourself in a system someone else built," he continued, "so that the deficit would always be yours. That is not evidence. That is a very old trick. You have known me for less than 24 hours. I have had 400 years to learn what the trick looks like." He set the book down on the hall table. Stay. She did not move toward the door. He came to her in the library at midnight, where she had been reading everything on the shelves with old family provenance markings, which turned out to be most of them, because she could not sleep, and her hands needed something to do. He stood in the doorway and looked at her for a moment that lasted longer than moments usually did, and then he came in and crossed to the chair across from hers, and went down on one knee on the library floor, which was not something she had expected from a man who had driven a Bentley through 3 red lights without blinking. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it without arguing with it." She set the book down. "You are not a collateral item. You are not a debt instrument. You are not a complication. You are a woman who read a lease addendum at a dinner table and recited the clause numbers from memory and did not apologize for knowing them. And that is the thing I noticed before I noticed anything else." He was looking up at her, and his voice had the quality she had heard in the car, the quality of someone who was not performing. "I have had company for 400 years that was either afraid of what I am or wanted something from what I am, and neither of those things is company. What you are is something I have not encountered, which is a person who is exactly as difficult as the situation requires, and no more, and I would like you to stop accounting for that as a liability." She looked at him. "I did not come to your building because I owed you something. I came because you were the first person in 400 years to send me a message that assumed I might help without asking whether I would. I said it was probably the wrong number. And then you sent it anyway." He looked at her the way he had looked at her in the doorway of the bathroom, which was the way she was beginning to understand was simply how he looked at her. "You were not a burden I rescued. You were the first honest thing I had encountered in a very long time, and I was not going to leave it on the 8th floor of the Alderton building." She felt the belief she had been carrying since she was old enough to carry things shift in a way that was not dramatic and was not comfortable, and was entirely real. All right. She reached across the space between them and touched the back of his hand, which was the first time she had touched him on purpose, and he went very still in the way that meant it mattered. He explained what the binding was before he offered it. He sat across from her at the library table with the smallest of the old contracts spread between them, the one that governed voluntary lineage transfers within their own law, and he walked through every clause in plain language and told her what it would do and what it would not do, and what it would cost him and what it might give her. He told her that the archivist function was latent in her bloodline, and that the binding would not create it, but would unlock it, and that she would be able to read and ratify supernatural documentation, and that the consortium's claim would still exist, but she would be able to examine the instrument itself rather than their copy of it. He told her the binding was permanent, and that she should take 24 hours. She read the contract herself first. It took her 11 minutes. The consent clause. The binding does not complete unless the second party initiates the final ratification. It says here the second party must speak the last line. Yes, so I have to decide. You always had to decide. I wanted you to know that before you read the document. She looked at the contract. She looked at him. She thought about her mother's copy files in a storage unit in a building on East Carver Street that she had been paying the rental on for 6 years because she could not bring herself to stop, and about the debt instrument the consortium had set on the table like a deed of purchase, and about the clause numbers she had memorized from a lease addendum at a dinner table in front of 4 witnesses. She spoke the last line. The library windows lit for 1 second with something that was not electricity. She felt the archivist function arrive in her the way she imagined a key felt, arriving in a lock that had been waiting a long time. Now I need to make a phone call about a storage unit. They came at 4 in the morning on the 3rd day, which was earlier than the 72 hours Aldrich had stated, which told her the consortium had decided the 72 hours had been a courtesy rather than a deadline. She heard the perimeter breach from the records room on the 2nd floor, where she had been cross-referencing the copies from her mother's storage unit against the supernatural commercial law index that Elias's library contained. The index alone ran to 14 volumes and 3 centuries of case annotations. She had been reading it in every available hour, and the estate staff had brought her food and fresh tea without commenting on the pace of her work or the volume of paper she had moved from the shelves to the long reading table. She heard him fighting below. She understood the sounds better than she had expected to. There was a quality to his movement, a particular weight to the silence between his actions that she had been cataloguing without intending to for 3 days, the same way she catalogued document structure. She could track him from the 2nd floor by the pauses alone. She did not go to the window because she understood instinctively that watching it directly would pull her attention outside the room, and she needed her attention inside the room, on the documents. She kept reading. Then the door to the records room opened. 2 men came in. They were not the same 2 who had stood in the entrance hall doorway as witnesses. These were the working personnel, the ones who carried the consortium's interest in their hands rather than in a portfolio, and the larger of them looked at her sitting at the table surrounded by 600 years of copied documentation and assessed her threat level, and apparently concluded she registered at approximately 0. He grabbed her left arm. The binder was open on the table in front of her. It was a 3-ring binder, the old institutional kind, with a metal rail along the spine. She had been using it to hold the consortium's document copies flat while she photographed them. She took the binder in her right hand and drove the metal corner of the open rail across the inside of his wrist, and then up and across the ridge above his eye socket, and he dropped her arm, and she stood up and hit him across the temple, with the binder spine closed, 1 short controlled swing, and he went down on the records room floor and stayed there. The 2nd man stood in the doorway. She looked at him. He was looking at the man on the floor. She held the binder with both hands and looked at him over it. He took a step toward her. The debt instrument your consortium presented on the 1st evening. Her voice was clear and level. I have been reviewing my mother's copy files. The 1983 renewal, the one that extended the instrument's validity, was signed under consortium internal law requiring the archivist's ratification to be witnessed by 2 consortium officers of director rank or above. He stopped. Your director Vayne was 19 years old in 1983. He was not yet a director. The 2nd signatory, a man named Oscar Helm, died in 1989 before reaching director rank. The renewal was not validly witnessed. Under supernatural commercial law, an invalidly witnessed renewal renders the original instrument lapsed. She set the binder on the table, because she no longer needed it. Your consortium does not have a claim. It has a very old piece of paper with a procedural defect that makes it unenforceable. The second enforcer looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at his colleague on the floor. Then he looked at the documents on the table. Elias came through the door behind him. He assessed the room in 2 seconds. The man on the floor, the second man standing. Nora on the far side of the table with the binder and 600 years of copied documentation and the particular expression of someone who has been working toward a specific conclusion for 36 hours and has arrived at it. He looked at her. The instrument is void. The 1983 renewal was not properly witnessed. The debt lapsed. I can document it from their own copies. He crossed the room, took the second enforcer by the back of his collar without particular urgency, and put him in the hall. Then he came back in. Elias Vayne arrived 40 minutes later, with 4 people who were apparently his personal security, and a level of controlled outrage that had the quality of a man who had been planning something for 30 years and had just been told the building was on the wrong lot. Elias was in the entrance hall. Nora was beside him, which was not where Vayne had expected her to be, based on the way he looked at her. She read the expiry clause aloud. She read the witnessing requirement. She read the 1983 signatory page from her mother's copy, which included a notation in her mother's handwriting that said, in the cramped shorthand Nora had been reading since childhood, both witnesses deficient. Do not countersign. Her mother had not countersigned. The original instrument lacked the archivist's countersignature. Vayne looked at Nora. He looked at Elias. You had no idea she could do this. No, Elias looked back at him without expression. I knew she could read. I did not know what she would find. Vayne looked around the entrance hall, where 3 of Elias's household staff were standing, and the 2 surviving enforcers from the records room were standing, and the man who had been sent as Aldrich's assistant was standing, and a woman Nora did not know, who had apparently arrived overnight as a neutral observer, was standing with a recording device in her hand. 7 witnesses. The consortium will want to review the documentation independently. The consortium is welcome to. Nora kept her voice precisely as neutral as Vayne's. I have photographs of every page. I will send them to whatever address you provide. I would suggest your legal team look at the 1977 instrument as well, which my mother also retained copies of, and which has a different but equally interesting defect. Vayne looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Elias. Elias killed him. He did it cleanly and quickly, and with the quality of someone who had been patient about it for the entire length of the conversation and was now done. The 2 surviving enforcers were in the hallway. They were breathing. They had watched the entrance hall. Take him back. Elias did not raise his voice. Tell the consortium that their legal claim has been audited by a ratified archivist and found to be without standing. Tell them also that the Vasquez lineage is now under the direct protection of Vayne House, and that any further approach will be treated as a territorial aggression rather than a commercial dispute. He looked at the neutral observer who had not stopped the recording device. Thank you for coming. She left without comment. The 2 enforcers left with Elias Vayne. The entrance hall was very quiet. The house was still doing the small things that houses did after something large had passed through them, settling, resettling, the creak of a floor beam returning to itself. Outside the library windows, the city was beginning its early morning routines. The first delivery trucks on the avenue below, a light coming on in a building across the street. Elias stood near the fireplace with his coat still on. He had not taken it off. The quality he had after doing what he had done was a particular kind of stillness, the kind that came from 400 years of knowing what you were, and she understood now that it was not coldness. It was the opposite. It was a man who was entirely aware of what he had cost other people, and could not stop being aware of it. I need to say something. Go ahead. I am what you saw in that hall. That is not a version of me that appears under pressure. That is the thing I am, with a layer over it that functions well in libraries and hospitals and cars at 3 a.m. He looked at the fire. I wanted to make sure you had seen both before anything else happened. She crossed the room. She put her hand against the side of his face, the way you touched something to prove it was real, and he went still under it the way he had in the library when she had touched his hand. You came to an 8th floor apartment at 11 at night, she said, because a stranger sent you a message about a man outside her door. You taped the injury that was the same as the one you mirrored. You drove with one hand on the wheel and 2 fingers on my wrist to tell me I wasn't going into shock. She kept her hand where it was. I know what you are. You told me in the car. You have been doing this for a long time. He looked at her. I used to believe I cost more than I was worth, she said. It turns out I was being assessed in the wrong currency. She lowered a hand but did not step back. The thing you said in the library. About being the first honest thing you had encountered. I want you to know that goes in both directions. Something in his face shifted the way the library windows had shifted when she had spoken the last line of the binding, which was briefly and entirely. There is a procedural question, he said after a moment. About what comes next. Archivist functions, under our law, require a formal house affiliation for the ratification to be recognised by other clans. You are asking whether I want to be affiliated with Vayne House. I am explaining the legal situation. You are asking, she said, in the way you do things, which is to explain the relevant clause and then wait. He almost smiled. She was certain of it. Yes, I'll think about it after I sleep, and after someone feeds me something that is not tea, and after I call my storage unit about the 1977 instrument, because I meant what I said to Vayne, and I want to follow up on that today. It is 5 a.m. The storage facility opens at 7:30. He looked at her. The clause about the 1983 witnessing defect, she said. Did you know about it? No. Did you know there might be something? He was quiet for a moment. I knew your mother was a careful woman who did not countersign things she did not trust. I did not know what she had kept. Nora thought about her mother, who had died owing someone something, and had taught her daughter to read the kind of contracts that most people never saw, and who had kept copies of everything, and who had noted in her own cramped shorthand, next to a document she had refused to countersign, both witnesses deficient. Her mother had known. Her mother had left her the answer. All right. I am going to sleep for 2 hours. Then I am going to want something with eggs in it. And then I am going to review the 1977 instrument, and you are welcome to sit across the table and read whatever you are reading before all of this started, because I do not require company while I work, but I also do not object to it. He took off his coat finally. He folded it over the back of the nearest chair with the precise habitual care of someone who had been folding things carefully for a very long time, and he looked at her with the expression she was beginning to think of as simply his expression, and he said nothing, because it was already understood. She went upstairs. He went to the library. At 7:20 she came downstairs in clothes his staff had apparently sourced overnight, and found him still at the library table, the 63-year Calderash dispute open in front of him. A mug of something hot at the spot across from his that had not been there at 5 a.m. She sat down. She pulled the mug toward her. The egg situation. He looked up. I was told there would be eggs. He closed the Calderash dispute. Morrow he aimed the word at the doorway without raising his voice.